Universal grammar is the hypothesis that all humans are born with certain restrictions on language structure. And those constraints will also allow an infant to acquire the language in their environment. Asserting that language universal exists should be your last resort when you're doing science, because it's really easy to blame everything on the genome, and of course we have no idea how these things are coded, and then it becomes really a fairy tale of how language has the structure that it has. What are those alternative interpretations? Well, what we're trying to do is rule them one by one, and after we rule them out, only then we can consider the possibility that maybe language universals are really there.
Либів, кнук.
One you mentioned, maybe you are just analogizing what you hear to other structures that exist in your language. So blah is good, not because you're born with or your language system is configured inherently to process this better, but because you have other words in your language that are similar. What happens when you look at infants that have no linguistic experience at all? We actually ran these experiments in previous research, and we did take neonates and we examined their brain, and we asked the question of whether the brain of those neonates, which are 1 to 3 days old, has easier time processing syllables like blah over syllables like ba, and that's exactly what we found. A second line of research is asking, maybe there is an auditory explanation to what's going on here. The language system itself doesn't care about it. It's the auditory system that fails there. Again, we can test this. For example, we can repeat the experiments while people are presented with printed words rather than auditory words. But it turns out that the troubles persist even with printed materials. The third explanation has to do with these articulatory constraints. So the idea is that when you hear ba, you actually are going, your brain is trying to go ba to actually activate the motor system. It's really hard, you fail, and that's why you have troubles with that.
So what happens if you take brain stimulation that we've developed, a way to disrupt activity in specific parts of the brain, and disrupt the parts of the brain that control the capacity of an individual's brain to move, articulate, to move the tongue or the lips and so forth.
So basically, if you kill the motor area, we're not doing it fully, but if you were to disrupt it, whether this is going to in fact disrupt your sensitivity to the syllable hierarchy. And the answer is it doesn't. And it's not because you don't care about TMS. So we do find subtle effects of the TMS on syllables that you're very familiar with. But for these really crazy syllables that don't exist in your language, we don't find that motor simulation is important at all. We don't find very little effect. So it's unlikely that the effects that we see for all these bad syllables occur because you're trying to activate the motor system. It's the opposite. In fact, if anything, you're only activating the motor system for syllables that you know, not for syllables that you don't know.